What's good, everybody, and welcome to a very special interview and episode of the What's Good Games podcast. I'm Andrea Renee, joined by Miss Brittany Brombacher. Hello. And welcome back to the show, CEO and President of the ESA. It is Stanley Pierre-Louis. So good to see you, Stan.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I love what you guys do.
I was listening back to the interview that we did with you last year when the Essential Facts came out, and it was such a fun interview to hear some really great anecdotes about video game business and the work that the ESA does. And it's been a roller coaster of us. I was going to say a year, but it hasn't quite been a full year since we talked last. But you guys have your brand new Essential Facts that are out now with a brand new set of data. And I'm excited to just dive right in. So since we saw you last, what's been like the one big stat that you guys noticed changed from these Essential Facts?
Well, thanks for having me again, and thanks for you guys do for our industry, because having voices who really bring in different perspectives and bring a lot of fun and levity to it allows people to capture that information and to feel like they're part of this larger community. So I just first and foremost want to make sure that you get your flowers, as they say
thank
today.
you.
You guys do.
That's really kind of you. We paid him to say that, everybody.
We did.
It's a small amount, but every amount helps.
So now we have to disclose it. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so back to the question.
So every year we do this Essential Facts study, and it really is an annual survey that helps us understand U.S. player demographics, the behaviors of the people who play games, and perceptions about the U.S. video game industry. And one of the cool things about doing it this year was, one, this is our 30th anniversary as a trade association. So it allowed us to go back to look forward to see where we've been over these past 30 years. We were founded in 1994, along with the Entertainment Software Rating Board, the ESRB, to really help our industry have a focus in Washington and in the States to protect the industry, but also to explain it to a lot of policymakers who didn't quite understand what we did. And so now to see where we are 30 years later has been tremendous. And so a lot of the stats are about where we were then and where we're now. But let's talk a little bit about where we are now, and then we can look backwards and forward. Our survey this year revealed that, again, almost 2 out of every 3 people in the U.S. play games, which translates to about 190 million.
Yeah, we're taking over.
We are taking over and staying there, which is critically important. We also saw that there's broad appeal with every demographic, irrespective of gender, race, ethnicity, or age. And when you look at the demographics of the United States and the demographics of video game players, they really do mirror up. There has always been this misconception about who plays and what the player looks like. Yet we find, particularly with respect to gender, about half the players are women, about 46% of people.
Yeah,
who play are
buddy.
women. And that number's been on the increase, but has stabilized in close to 50%, not only in the US, but in other studies I've seen around the world. So women continue to play in high numbers. One of the interesting stats we found in this number is if you ask women, are you a gamer? About 35% of women say they're gamers. But if you ask, do you play games? About 56% of women play games. So there is something in how you ask the game. And we've also found that when you personalize it and humanize games to people, they realize that games are closer than they think. So if I ask someone, do you know anyone in your life who plays games? They'll say, well, in this case, it was a woman. And she goes, I just play, Candy Crush an hour before I go to bed every night, just to kind of relax before I go to bed, but I'm not really a gamer. And then she kind of caught herself and said, but I play for an hour every day. So
you're one of us. You're one of us.
That's right. And so how you frame it really does reveal where people are. And that's what's helped us expand, particularly as you think about mobile and the expansive nature of mobile and where it's been. The other misconception people have had is that it's a young people's sport. And what we have found is that people don't age out of games. They evolve over time. And there are ebbs and flows of when we're playing games. But when we first did this study in 1999, only 9% of players were age 50 or older. This year, 29% are age 50 and older. So it's been interesting to see like the huge change in how people think about games and who they are. And the percentages that we're looking at are more than, below 18s. So a lot of people are playing games in every demographic. And I think we always want to remind people about that, but we also want to humanize it so that they're thinking about themselves as part of this community, even if they're not what might be traditionally considered hardcore gamers.
I saw in the report that this year's report marks the first year that children ages 5 to 17 were included in the data. And this really spoke to me because I was 5 when I started playing video games. So how have you found that including that age group has changed the data, or I guess given more insight into it?
Well, in the past, we've asked parents about what they see in their households. This was the first year we decided to reach down and interview and ask questions about the experience. We did all this with parent supervision and parent approval and wanted to understand it. We really wanted to see what this next generation of players was looking like. One of the things we saw is they like the games that a lot of people like, but age appropriate, obviously, arcade games,
Hopefully.
puzzle games, action games. Um, we do a lot of work to ensure that parents have information, tools, and resources about what games are age appropriate. We do that through the ESRB, the Entertainment Software Rating Board, as an industry. They are the self-regulatory group that the Federal Trade Commission has really lauded for its work, saying it's the best of all the entertainment self-regulatory models. And it provides age rating, telling you exactly what's in the game. So it has content descriptions. It tells you if it connects to the internet, if there are purchases available in the game. And it also has directions on how to manage those tools. How do we get on a PC or a console and block certain content, or limit the amount of time spent or money spent? These days, you can even use an app to limit time and money spent. We've seen some of our colleagues get little pings from their kids saying, "Hey, I need 5 more minutes or 10 more minutes on Minecraft." And,
Do you need more?
yeah, you might. It depends. Like sometimes you really do. But in looking at that, like we really got to see firsthand where this next generation is going. One of the things we learned is that the heaviest users of consoles and PCs are actually Gen Z and Gen A. They actually lead the way in using consoles and PCs. So as people bemoan the death of consoles, we're looking at a new generation that really enjoys playing on those devices. So I think it's exciting to see that they're playing, that they're doing so with family. We also asked parents about their gameplay. We found that 72% of American parents play games, and 83% of those parents, those gamer parents, play with their children. And they cite, family time and shared enjoyment as top reasons for doing this. So we're finding that kids are playing, but they're also playing with their parents who also play games. So it's multi-generational in the best way possible.
That's the dream for me. Andrea and I both have 3-year-olds now. And I mean, I just think of all of the games I want to play with my kid when he's old enough to actually grasp the idea. Because I do remember, and all those reasons that the parents mentioned are legit, but even my learning, my reading comprehension, my spelling, all of those things so vastly improved because I was playing games like Super Mario RPG before I could even really read that well, So I think that's really cool.
There's been research in the past few years that found that kids playing, so 10 to 15 years old actually experience less stress, but also playing games helps kids learn, learning how to learn, because there's so much excitement about what is going on behind the scenes. What is this game about? And I think that while they're playing, they're learning how to learn and how exciting it is to make something, to become creators and innovators.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also it's important for parents to remember that it's such a great experience to be able to have that moment with your child. And as I, get older as a parent and start to learn about some of the different tools, clearly Brittany and I have a leg up on most gamer parents because we work in the video games industry. And so we know what a lot of the tools are. But the idea that the ESRB is adding that educational component to hey, not only are we going to tell you what's inside the games from a software perspective, but we're going to take it one step further and show you how you manage it within the hardware as well. There's so many tools now. It's a question that I still frequently get from my friends who are parents that don't work in games that are how do I limit it with the Wi-Fi, or how do I get them to put down the Fortnite every night? And I'm well, that's probably a more complicated answer than I can probably give you. But I can tell you about the tools that are available and built into the platform, because I recently did an interview about a story that happened in Norway around bullying in Fortnite. And this has been a story that's come up several times over the last couple of years. And I know that Epic Games, as the publisher of that, has really taken some serious steps to making their player base safe. But it's like, well, what can parents do? And I'm so glad that there are tools. And I always point people to the ESRB. Shout out to Patricia Vance and her fantastic team over there. We loved chatting with her last year. Probably should get her back on the show to hear about all the new stuff they have going on.
Yeah, they have some tremendous things. And as you talk about bullying and how to and safety online, one of the things we've seen is tremendous investment, really over many years, but more so in the past few years, really doubling down on how do you create a safe community for all players online. And so in addition to the significant investments in the ESRB and what it does, and in some parental tools, you're seeing a lot of companies create voice chat opportunities to capture what's happening and send it in and say, hey, I don't like what's happening here. And so they're investing in moderation tools to ensure that the experience is as fun as possible for everyone. And they're really trying to impress upon users that we want this community to be great. We're different than a lot of other online media. We say that, but when you really go into social media and see what's happening in other platforms, video games really do depend on community and people enjoying their time in the space. That's how you make your money, right? People are going to want to come back, but that's how you create fans who want to be part of the community, is by creating those environments. So there's been tremendous commitments and investments by a number of companies in our space to ensure that they're creating fun environments.
Stan, I would love to get your take on something, and this is kind of switching gears a little bit, but I don't really know who better to ask than you. So something that we've heard lately amidst all the layoffs and just kind of the contraction of every company trying to squeeze more money. Anyway, I digress. We've heard a lot of executives say that the problem is that the overall player base in this industry just isn't expanding. And I have this quote from Phil Spencer here, and I want to read it because I want to make sure I get it right. And the quote is, "I don't think we're doing a good enough job finding new players. Let's pick consoles as a good example. We found 200 million global households that will play console games, and that number really hasn't changed the last 5-6 years. We found ways of getting more money per player, but I think at some point you reach a peak on that." And I hear that, and then I see these stats about how Gen Alpha is the generation with the highest percentage of video game players, and 79% of Gen Alpha plays weekly, and Gen Alpha and Gen Z are the biggest users of consoles and PCs. So as the data guy, as the guy who knows everything about the video game industry, you can add that to your resume. I'd love to know, like, what's your take on what Phil Spencer said?
Well, I think one of the ways that video games are going to expand is through various platforms. Let's take Netflix, for example. Netflix has started down a path of trying to create games where you can stream, right? And that's created an effort by lots of other companies to see what are they doing with cloud gaming. So I think the more you meet the customer where that customer is, the more likely you are to create an opportunity for more customers to want to come in, or I call them fans or players. I think each platform may have a different cycle. So whereas Gen Alpha and Gen Z have really taken to consoles, if you look at the boomers and the silent generation with kind of the 78 to 96-year-old players up there, which there are many, as we've talked about, they're more mobile. And so the mobile market might be growing, right? And actually mobile's been the most prolific of the game markets, growing over the past several years. So I think meeting the customer where they are, as they typically say, is the ultimate goal. And that's how you expand the markets.
I think that there's so many ways to play games. I think that is so tied into what you were talking about when we first started chatting about this idea of people just thinking about themselves as a gamer and being part of video game culture versus, oh, I'm just playing this thing on my phone or on my TV, but it's not a game. And it's like, well, no, it is.
You're one of us.
And so I think that those kind of things are intrinsically tied together. But I do want to touch on what Brittany had mentioned before she read Phil's quote about what's been happening in the industry, because since we had you on the show last, there's been quite a bunch of financial change across the industry. The giant merger with Activision Blizzard happened with Microsoft. We saw several other mergers and acquisitions. And now in the last couple of months, we've seen studio closures and some retractions and mass layoffs. And it kind of just feels like this big old roller coaster happening. And the thing I keep getting told and echoed throughout the more business-focused sections of the industry is video games are doing very well overall. This isn't a big crash. There's no big video game crash coming. So as people who have, one of the pillars as the work that the ESA does being, supporting the workforce of this industry, what are you hearing? And, what are your thoughts on the health of the industry right now?
Well, I think there are lots of things going on, and each company is different. For every company that's had a news about headwinds, you've seen other companies come up with great games, and some of that is timing. I think a few things are at play all at once, but overall it'll end with me telling you that the industry is actually in a very, very healthy place, and the goal is to try to sustain it. I think part of this is that there was a COVID spike where there was tremendous interest in the industry because people were socially distancing, staying home, and many people were actually rediscovering quite a few games, a lot of catalog games, for example, that were available, and people who hadn't played in a long time who were playing with the joystick, and they came back, and all of a sudden they were exposed to photorealism and amazing lifelike sports and gameplay.
Animal Crossing, Stan, let's call it what it was, Animal Crossing.
Animal Crossing.
Guilty. Guilty.
And so I think there was a spike, and I think now things are stabilizing, but as part of that stabilizing, different companies are reacting in different ways, depending on where they are in the life cycle of their games or, their reports to the markets and the like. And so I think we're seeing different companies making different decisions around different circumstances. I think in the end, though, we've seen a growth in this industry. If you look at the past decade, I think in 2013, overall revenues in the US were about $15 billion. Last year, they were 57.2. They actually spiked even higher during COVID, but they've now stabilized a little bit since COVID. So overall, it's still a healthy industry where people love playing games. We're talking about the numbers of people who continue to play and buy games. I think as these games come out, that's going to help as well. You saw somewhat of a slowdown in some of the game releases during and shortly after COVID. All these companies, not only in our industry, but in every industry, are trying to figure out what does the workforce look like? Where is the workforce working from? And how does that change how we're producing what we do? For our industry, that means how do you still make a game in a cost-effective manner, in a timely manner, where we're seeing games in the hundreds of millions of dollars now taking 5 to 7 years to make, as opposed to several years ago where it took maybe 3 to 5 years to make. So I think all these things go into where we are cyclically, but in the end, it still is a healthy industry. There are still open positions. They may be for different roles than before. But I think as we see how we come out of COVID a little bit more, we'll see even more stabilizing and some of the growth that we've seen in the past continue to sustain itself.
I think that's all we can hope for. It's the thing that we keep talking about. We had the wonderful Joni Kraut on the show recently, who is the head of Women in Gaming International. And we were talking to her about all of the job resources that they have. And they have an influx of positions that are available and tools. And I think that's the thing that we keep trying to drive home is like, yeah, this news is hard and it's frustrating and you get to feel those feelings. But good news, there's lots of companies in this business and a lot of them actually are hiring. So while no one ever likes going through the interview process, sorry to all the HR folks out there, there are lots of companies that are actually expanding, which is, as you said, indicative of the overall health of the industry. But
yeah, and I also say that it's very rare for our industry to be going through a news cycle like this. If you look at where we've been through all of the various economic issues in the U.S. in 2008, all the really tough times that the country's gone through at different moments, the games industry just kept moving along. And I think it just spoke to the fact that games provide people with joy, relaxation, mental stimulation, connection with others. And we see that all over this year's report, that people come to games because it's fun, but they also come to games because it connects them with others and it brings them joy and it gives them stress relief. And that's a huge reason why people play. And so I think there's a continual interest in the games, and this is a different time for our industry, but I suspect with all the announcements we've seen about games coming out over the next couple of years, it's going to maintain that excitement.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, listen, 2023 was a banger of a year, and it's going to be hard to top how many fantastic games came out. But just this week, we covered the story about the viral hit Helldivers 2 and how it's now become the #1 PlayStation 5 game on the platform. We're like, how did that happen? Have you been
watched
helldiving?
any bugs? Yeah. Have you been helldiving, Stan?
Not yet. I'm so you guys earlier talked about, your young children. I'm trying to launch mine, a high school senior, into his next phase. So once we launch, then I can go diving.
Yes, for democracy. I wasn't going to play, I'm going to be honest, but then it just the roar about the game was so loud. I was like, okay, I must experience what all the hype is, and turns out it's pretty fun. It's a good time. Pardon the interruption to your regularly scheduled podcast, but we're about to play some ads. But if you want to not listen to those ads, you've got to head on over to whatsgoodgames.supercast.com, where you can join our premium membership and listen ad-free. You can even connect your favorite podcast player like Spotify or Apple Podcasts right in your premium membership feed. That's whatsgoodgames.supercast.com to support the show and listen ad-free. whatsgoodgames.supercast.com.
I feel like, and this is like me being ignorant, whenever I see high school kids talking about the games they're playing, it's just usually like Fortnite or something else. In your data, sir, have you found that those kids ever go back to maybe older games, or they go back to more single player focused experiences? Or I'm wondering, like, honestly, is it all generational that they have all of these community focused games like, again, Roblox and Fortnite and whatnot? But I feel like I don't ever see them talking about the single player greats of yesteryear and today year.
I think that they really like games that connect them with others, because games are part of their social construct. Like, it's interesting, like we were talking about this the other day. We are still talking about, are you a gamer or a player? That next generation doesn't divide themselves up that way. They are multi-hyphenates. I play soccer, and I read, and I go to whatever. Like, their games are just another part of their lives. And so I think, and it's part of their community lives that they enjoy. So I think they love puzzle games and arcade games and all those other games and Fortnite. But it's funny. I've seen some kids going back to Pokemon Go, believe it or not.
Really?
Oh, Brittany has a long history with that game.
Oh, a very long, expensive history. So, that's interesting. So you're finding that maybe the younger generations aren't using the title gamer really, like I felt like how it defined us when we were breaking into this industry.
No, it's just another thing they do. It's just part of what they did yesterday.
That's awesome. I love that. I mean, listen, like we've always been about take the term gamer and nerd back, embrace it. But I find that, even if I describe myself as a nerd to people that are maybe my age or older, they're like, oh, no, don't say that. That's not true. That's not a nice thing to say. And I'm like, I don't care. That doesn't bother me. But
it does not bother the next generation either.
Cool. Yeah. Go with you guys.
Yeah. You don't have to pigeonhole your identity into one thing. You can play mobile games and console games, everybody.
You can. It's funny you mentioned the mobile games and console games. When we did this survey a few years back, so in 2012, about 33% of people played games on a mobile device. This past year, 78% do. When we did a study in 1999, 18% of people said they played online. And just to age ourselves, we spelled online with a dash, like on dash line. And today, 90% play online. So you're going from 18% to 90%. What we're seeing is that everyone is enjoying the games irrespective of platform, but they're gravitating to things that they love and that reach them. So all the games you're talking about, whether it's Fortnite or Minecraft or other games, being able to play on one or other platform really helps people expand their networks. Fortnite's one of those games where you can play on all the platforms with each other. And so it creates a space where you can have friends who have a different platform than you do. So I think more and more games are finding ways of finding people. I know many companies have looked for ways to be cross-platform increasingly.
Makes sense.
I want to ask about an issue that's come up quite a few times over the last several months since we spoke. And I know we touched on it a little bit in our last interview, but the concept of AI has been a real hot topic in video game circles, both amongst consumers and, of course, amongst professionals. And having recently attended the Game Developers Conference, GDC, I got to see two very different sides of the conversation around AI and everything that's happening around it, particularly where we're at now with, potential legislation happening in different countries around the world taking very different stances on it. I know that the ESA has official, messaging and guidance around it, but how has the conversation around it changed for the people on your team and your staff? What are some of the things that you guys are chatting to partners about right now in regards to where AI is at?
Well, first of all, we always let policymakers know that video games have been working with AI for well over a decade. And, whether you're talking about non-playable characters or even some load balancing or player matching, there have been a number of ways that AI has been used and in ways that I think people have found very helpful. The new conversation, because of generative AI, has launched into what does this mean for the workforce? What does this mean about how we're making games and the like? And I think one of the things I've heard repeatedly from leaders of the industry is, one, AI is a technology, it's a tool, it's not the answer. So it's something that that the workforce will need to understand how to work with, but something that really should supplement what's happening. And I've heard it spoken about as something that allows for example, allowing for higher order work by the really creative and talented people who are making games, and allowing the AI to finish the line of code on some background material. And this happens in software all the time, where AI is being used. And there are probably simple forms of AI that we see every day where it's, autofilling names or autofilling information or words that you're typing in. How can that work to fill out the background while you're doing higher order work and not the drudgery, right? AI has also been critically important in trust and safety. So in addition to the moderation that's happening through humans, both on the end with the companies and by people self-reporting, how do you use AI to recognize patterns of behavior to stop toxicity online? And so you're seeing investments in AI to track behavior that is not helpful in a community. And so I've seen it as a supplement to workforce and as a tool to help in trust and safety. How it gets used beyond that, I think, is still an open question. There are really complicated intellectual property questions, like who owns the copyright if AI is creating it, and companies don't want to lose their rights by using machines to create works. And so there are questions about what is copyrightable. And I also think that there are a lot of questions about how far AI will go. There are a lot of companies that want to use AI to maybe even mine their own IP to figure out what we've done in the past and what that looked like, but not allowing others to see that. So I think the questions about AI are still huge and unanswered, but I think there is some promise out there. When we advocate for industry, we try to get legislators not to be overly regulatory because we don't know where it's going, and regulation tends to be, probably
restrictive.
Not just restrictive, but it's that it's obsolete by the time it gets passed.
That's true.
And so how do you make it so that you can still iterate and use it in a way that's positive? But the jury is way out on this one. There are no solid answers. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you.
No, you don't have to be the one, because as you've just detailed, it's such a broad application of technology. A big thing that was talked about in the last couple of months was AI in regards to voice acting. Obviously, SAG had a huge strike last year, and in the negotiations with the video game companies and the video game agreement, which did get approved, there is they did talk about if we're going to use AI, let's make sure that we do it the right way. And SAG did approve using voice actors' voices with their consent, which is what the wonderful Jennifer Hale talked to us about. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her work. She's a pretty legendary voice actor, and she's done a lot of work in video games. And she spoke extensively about, hey, we don't, universally think AI is bad. We just, want to be compensated if you're going to use our voices. And so I think it's been really interesting watching the conversation and where it goes in particular places. Did you see any of the new AI tools at GDC? Some of them are just wild.
Yeah, it's been interesting seeing that, and then just seeing how it's being used in games and in other media. there's a lot of questions about transparency, about like, how do you ensure that people know when they're interacting with AI and not? So I think that'll be another big question we have to deal with. But I do, again, from everything I've heard from industry leaders and from what you're describing in these agreements, it's about supplementing what we're doing as opposed to replacing. And you want a human touch in these games. You really need that human perspective to understand cadence and inflection. And there are a lot of tools that can help you in a number of ways. But at the end of the day, that human interaction and human creativity just can't be beat.
I'll be honest, all of that sounds like a big old mess. And shout out to y'all for fighting the good fight. I wouldn't touch that problem with a 10-foot pole, Stan. I gotta be honest.
It's murky, and everyone has very different opinions from very different perspectives, and it's interesting hearing them all. But yeah, it's a quagmire for sure. Listen, we're getting towards the end of our time, but I wanted to ask, since it's an election year here in the United States, and a lot of what the ESA does is based around legislation and educating not only the general public, as we've been talking about with these essential facts, but our lawmakers as well. Are there any key issues that you guys are, spotlighting or focusing on for people, voters, to kind of pay attention to for this election year?
Well, as an industry, we are both innovative and creative. And what that means in Washington is we are a tech industry and we are an IP industry. We make the games that you love to play, and we make the devices and platforms that you play them on. And so for us, a lot of the issues revolve around all of the things you see on the IP front, whether it's copyright protection, trade, and making sure that we have access to other markets, as well as on the tech side, the privacy laws and things that apply in tech. We've been spending a lot of time to ensure that policymakers understand the work we do to protect consumers and the investments we make online for trust and safety. And that's been critically important in Washington. There's been legislation around how do you protect kids online with respect to social media. And those social media bills have started impacting our industry because you're trying to stop something happening on a social media platform, but you start bringing in anything online. And so we've been advocating quite a bit to understand, when are you talking about social media versus when are you talking about games? Because those are very different environments. No one's playing a game and chatting in order for the world to respond to their opinion on something happening in the world. They're doing it in the context of gameplay. That's a very different mindset if you're trying to gather attention in what you're trying to say. So I think that's important. You said it's an election year. One of the questions we asked was, do you intend to vote? 80% of those who responded, of adults who responded, said they intend to vote this year. So one of the things we also share with policymakers is we're an important voting bloc. You have 190 million people who play games. And when you start looking at who are the adults and 80% of them who say they're going to vote, we're important. And so we have to remind them, we are your constituents. We're in every state. We're in every jurisdiction. And so you've got to listen to us because we think it's important. And that number is up from when we last did this, the last election round. So
do you remember what that number was?
It was somewhere in the high 60s.
Oh,
And
wow.
so now it's at 80%. So
Okay.
a
Progress.
very, very, and this is a time where people really understand what's at stake. But there are so many issues that are at stake today, and people care about it on a number of fronts, irrespective of your party. When it breaks down, yet it's interesting, the numbers I think are 41% identified as Democrat, 26% as Republican, 21% as independent. So you've got this huge swing of how are people going to vote, particularly the independents, how are they going to impact what's going to happen? So it's an interesting way to think about our community and what we think, because different issues spark different interest among different voters.
I'm telling you, like these politicians that are trying to get elected just need to start holding virtual events. Like do a meetup in Roblox or Fortnite or Minecraft, and they'll galvanize a whole generation that maybe would have ignored them otherwise.
Yeah, and it's great, particularly in the States, but more in the federal, as younger people are coming into office. We're finding that they're not only familiar with games, but they've played as kids. And so they're starting to understand our issues and our industry much better. And that's been terrific for us because we're spending time explaining what they understand and just talking about the issues as opposed to trying to introduce us to people who know who we are and engage in our actual gamers, but you've got to frame it in the right way. So it's interesting seeing this new generation of policymaker come into office and know all about games.
It just makes my heart so happy.
Yes. I think we talked about this the last time you were here too, this idea of why does it feel like we still have to explain what video games are and who video game players are? When do we think the end is going to happen?
Well,
Stan, where it's no longer like a, let me tell you about video games, Johnny.
Yeah, well, I will tell you, one of the demarcations we will note down the road is COVID. I've had so many policymakers. I walk into the office and they say, I know exactly who you are. You were on you were on with Brittany, with Andrea, and I saw that. But aside from that, during COVID, my kids connected with their cousins and their family and friends through games. And I realized that it's their digital playground. Like I've had, like half the time we go in, people had a personal experience of a family member using games to connect with others or to pass time as a hobby that they didn't recognize this before. And so I think COVID is a huge line of demarcation of how people viewed games because it was such an important activity in their lives. And it normalized it for them in many ways. I think riding that momentum will be really important for us as an organization, as ESA, but also as our industry, like kind of fans out at your PTA meetings and the like. You're going to love PTA meetings, Brittany. You're going to love it.
It's going to be great. People have a drink beforehand. Who could say? I'm going to ask you to break out your magic 8-ball and give it a big fat shake. And my question to you would be, do you ever see a future? I feel like we're not hearing about this more and more, where it's like, oh, video games cause violence, video games causes this, let's pass bans and bills and all these bad things. Do you think there will be a future with this generation coming into all these roles of office and whatnot, where that just ceases to exist, where that's not even like a thought anymore as more folks are understanding the industry? Or do you think someone's going to live to be like 300 and maintain their role and keep bringing it up? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So here's an anecdote. It's not data. When there used to be sort of, pre-2018, 2019, actually pre-2020, when there were violent incidents, we would often get a call for a comment. And I think once we got to about 2018, 2019, we no longer get calls when there are issues that happen. So I think people have started separating that. I think COVID has had another impact on that. And I think now the issue about how does violence interact with games is much less than how do we separate from social media, because policymakers are justifiably concerned about what's going on online for kids and the like. The question is how to differentiate between the various mediums online. We're very different. We've talked about the ESRB. We've talked about the work on trust and safety. We've talked about communities that people are a part of. We haven't even talked about self-policing, right? You will see later on, Brittany, when your son is kicked out of his community for violating their server rules.
Oh, no.
Because every young boy gets kicked out of a server group at some point in time. They just do. All boys get kicked out.
Noted.
There's self-policing that happens. So it's a very different community than some other areas where you're just seeking attention. So I think for us, the bigger question now isn't going to be about media violence. It's going to be, how do we really make people appreciate the difference that the video game ecosystem has fostered from other online social platforms?
Okay.
Well, listen, Stan, we could keep talking for a much longer time. It's just so fascinating hearing your perspective and your experience and all of the work that you and your team do. But we are going to have to wrap this up. But we can't let you go.
Pour one out.
We're taking a moment of silence. Stan, last time you were here, you told us it wasn't dead, and now it's gone.
You told us it was coming back.
E3 is gone forever. We're so sad.
We are too. We have just seen how different the industry has evolved, how the reach that they have with the audiences they want to reach, and the platform of E3 was amazing, and we loved it, and we know the fans loved it. We know the member companies of ESA loved it. I can't tell you what's coming next because I don't have a magic 8-ball on that. But it is something that we are sad, but it was the right decision at the right time, given where our industry is today.
Yeah, I remember when the news happened and both Brittany and I were like, oh man, I'm so sad about this. Just because of what E3 has meant to each of us individually over the years. And I loved the outpouring of memories that people were sharing about what they did at the show or people they met or experiences they had. And I think that will definitely forever go down in our hearts as this amazing experience. But I mean, it feels like there's just this big old hole. And we know that Summer Game Fest is, filling part of that hole, but it's definitely not the same. And I just don't know. Do you think any kind of consumer show like that is ever going to come back to the United States?
It's really hard to tell. E3 was such a unique experience and a unique platform, and it just had everyone at their best, and sometimes competing, sometimes supporting, like whatever it was. Like E3 was just so larger than life and so great for our industry. And look, we need platforms to make sure that we continue showcasing who we are as an industry. E3 did that at a very high level. And the question is, what can we do to capture that? Because for us, we want to make sure that people remember how impactful we are in a positive way. E3 was a demonstration of it. Can we find something else like that? I don't have anything at my fingertips, but I will say we were really proud to have hosted that for so many years, and want to make sure that we answer any questions you have. So we feel you, but we also know that this was the right decision at the right time.
You can start PolicyCon. How exciting.
Oh my gosh, I can just see the booths now. Sign up to learn all about how to write your congressperson.
Right. Nerds welcome. Welcome.
Exactly. We're taking over, everybody. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for chatting with us about the incredible data in the essential facts for 2024. If you guys want to check it out for yourself, the ESA.com is the website where you can also check out all of the other policies that the ESA is working on, in addition to programs, resources, lots of information over there. Stan, do you have anything you want to send people off with? Something that you're working on, something you're playing, anything you're looking forward to?
I think we're excited about this. And this is our 30th anniversary. So we're going to be doing lots of things to celebrate 30 years of representing the greatest entertainment industry in the world. So we're very excited about celebrating our 30th.
Well, congratulations. We think the work that you do is incredibly important, even if most consumers have no idea that it exists. You're doing powerful work behind the scenes.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. That's going to do it for this special episode. Check out all of the links in the show notes below, and we'll see you next time.